Hey, what's going on, guys? Dan here with Gear Focus, and today I'm going to be telling you why I switched from the Sony A7S II to the brand new Canon EOS R. Now, I do want to preface this by saying that I have used my Sony camera for the last 3.5 years, day in and day out. I use it full time, and it has been an absolutely great camera for me. It is an absolute workhorse. I have had zero issues with the camera. It's been all over the place with me. It's been in the middle of desert. It's been in the middle of rainforest. Like I said, it's been all over the place. So it really has been a great camera. So first, let's talk about why I even decided to upgrade my camera in the first place. So in an earlier video, I mentioned that I was starting to do more photography work, and the 12.2 megapixel sensor that's in the A7S II was just not cutting it anymore. I needed something that had a higher megapixel count so that I could do a little bit more work in post with my images in terms of reframing or cropping or something like that. So I wanted something that had a higher megapixel count, something along the 24 to 30 megapixel range for my photo work. So another requirement I had for my new camera was that it needed to be mirrorless, and the reason for that is, generally speaking, mirrorless cameras are lighter weight than their DSLR counterparts, and for somebody that, generally speaking, when I go out for a shoot, I'm holding my camera for 3, 4, or more hours at a time, I needed something that I was able to carry and hold all day long. Another thing that's a really big benefit with a mirrorless camera is I can actually have a silent shutter. When you take pictures with a DSLR camera, there is a little piece of glass that flips back and forth and is going to make a click, click, click noise every time you press that shutter button, and sometimes that's not exactly something you want, particularly if you're in, say, like a recording environment, like in a recording studio or something like that, or if you're in a really intimate environment like a wedding. It's really kind of obnoxious when you hear that click over and over and over again, so having the option to do a silent shutter on a mirrorless camera is just another added benefit of having a mirrorless sensor. Now, the third thing that I needed my new camera to have was the ability to shoot in 4K. Now, granted, most cameras these days do shoot in 4K, it's kind of the standard at this point, but it was something that I did need to make sure the new camera had. Now, the last thing that I needed on the camera, and it does sound kind of stupid, but the last thing that I needed for the camera was to shoot to SD cards. Now, there are a lot of different recording formats out there where you have some of the Canon cameras shoot to CFast cards or compact flash cards, or like the Blackmagic 6K shoots to an SSD drive. I really wanted something that was shooting strictly to SD cards, as I have a ton of SD cards lying around. I have a bunch of cases, all kinds of stuff, so I didn't really want to have to invest in a new memory format for a new camera. Again, it's really not that big of a deal. Most cameras shoot to SD cards, have at least one SD card slot in them. Many have dual SD card slots in them, but it was something that was a deciding factor in my camera purchase. So given all of that information, the next logical step in the upgrade process would have been the Sony A7 III like I have right here. That makes sense. It's in the same lineup, it's in the same lens mount family, it's in the same form. It just makes sense that that would be the natural progression for the next camera. So why did I decide to completely switch ecosystems, completely ditch the Sony ecosystem and move to a brand new Canon ecosystem? And the reason for that is the lenses. Canon's lenses are phenomenal. I've been using Canon lenses on my Sony cameras for years now. The lenses are just better, they're sharper, they're cheaper for one, and it's just better glass. Sony glass is fantastic. There is a lot of options for fantastic Sony glass. However, generally speaking, it is more expensive than Canon's. Canon's EF mount has a ton of third-party support, whereas the E-mount system for the Sonys doesn't have nearly the support. It's very difficult finding lenses that are in the same price point for both a Sony camera and for a Canon camera. And for somebody like me that has a Metabones adapter already, it just made sense for me to start buying a bunch of EF glass because it worked better, and I had a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 6K with the EF mount on it and everything, so it just made more sense to have Canon EF glass. But on the flip side of that, the EOS R doesn't have an EF mount on it, it has the new RF mount. which is another big reason why I decided to go with the EOS R. The RF lenses are absolutely incredible. Now, I did mention that the Sony glass was expensive and the RF glass is even more expensive. Like the new 70-200 lens comes in at, I believe, like $2,600 or $2,700 or something ridiculous like that. But to me, the RF glass is justified in its price point. That glass is so sharp, it's so great, it's lightweight, it's smaller, the glass is just fantastic. Also, another big issue I had with pretty much all of my Sony cameras, and I've noticed pretty much every Sony user has this issue, is the weather sealing on Sony lenses is absolute trash. Every time I go to use my Sony camera, I have to take a blower to blow the dust off of the sensor, and that's super annoying, especially if I forget to do that, and then I record a whole day, and then I go and post, and there's a little piece of dust on my screen. Like, that's just super annoying. There's literally no weather sealing on any of the Sony lenses that I've ever used. Whereas all of the Canon glass that I have, including the RF to EF adapter, has a nice little rubber ring that goes all the way around to help seal the sensor. And another beautiful thing about the EOS R is it has an actual like cover for the sensor. I'll go ahead and take this off here. I don't know how well you can see that, but you can see that there's a little bit of a cover, and then when I turn it on, it comes right off. And when I turn it back off, it goes back down. So having something that covers the sensor like that and keeps the dust and the dirt out of my sensor and out of my camera is one of the greatest features that I could have ever possibly asked for in a camera, especially for somebody who is traveling around, going into deserts and forests and all kinds of stuff for some of my documentary work. So while we're on the topic of lenses, I do want to note that the EF to RF adapter that the EOS R uses is an absolutely fantastic adapter. It works absolutely flawlessly. There's no loss in any of the features for any of the lenses, and pretty much anybody that's ever used an adapter will tell you that when you're adapting two different brands of lenses to a different camera body, generally speaking, it's not always perfect. There's always something that goes wrong there, but the EF2 RF adapter works absolutely flawlessly. It's the best adapter I've ever used, and it's not super expensive. It's only $100. The EF mount just has a ton of aftermarket support or third-party support, and it's a whole lot easier to find those lenses for cheaper than an E mount. So even though I have a ton of access to EF glass, purchasing an EOS R lets me have access to the RF line of lenses. Those lenses are just absolutely fantastic. I've seen some amazing images come out of RF glass along with the EOS R body. I actually used the EOS R for a wedding with the 24-105 f4 RF lens, and when I was looking through the images after I finished shooting for that day, I was looking through the unedited JPEGs, and as I was looking through them, I just found myself looking at them and going, whoa, did I shoot that? Like, they were just incredible images, and they were so sharp, and because they were shot on the R, they worked so well. They just looked so great. The RF glass is fantastic. Canon is doing some amazing innovation when it comes to the RF line of lenses, like the 70-200, the one that's like this big, and that's absolutely tiny and it weighs like almost half of what the EF 70-200 weighs. Like the RF glass is just absolutely fantastic, and I can't wait to get my hands on some more and mess around with some more, and I'm super excited for what Canon has to offer when it comes to that RF line. Now, we all know that there's no such thing as a perfect camera, and I do have a few issues with the EOS R. The EOS R does have the 1.75 times crop in 4K, which is a little bit annoying, but I don't really notice a problem with it that often. The only time I notice an issue with it is when I am shooting my real estate work, and for that I just go ahead and switch back over to my A7S II because it does shoot full frame. But for pretty much everything else, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm just gonna shoot in 1080 so that I get the full frame, or I'm gonna reframe and take a couple steps back and be totally fine. So one last thing that is worth mentioning for the EOS R is the fact that it doesn't really shoot burst photos all that fast. Now, granted, I'm not a sports photographer, so I don't really need these ridiculously fast frame bursting for photos, but when I am shooting weddings, it is nice to have the ability to shoot some really quick bursts, and the EOS R only shoots at 5 frames per second, which again isn't really a huge deal because it's not something that I do all the time, but it is something that is worth noting, and I have noticed that in my usage of the EOS R. So again, I'm curious to know what you guys think about the decision that I made to switch over to the Canon ecosystem. Was it a smart decision to go ahead and ditch Sony, or was it kind of stupid that I went ahead and moved over to Canon when Sony has some great cameras that are supposed to be coming out in 2020? I'm curious to see your thoughts, so go ahead and leave them down in the comments below. And also, while you're down there, make sure you hit that like button and you hit that subscribe button, as we are going to be coming back with a bunch more content, and when you do that, it does really help us out here on the channel. So thanks for sticking around, and we'll see you in the next one.